The commander of the Libava naval base, Captain First Rank MS Klevensky, reported. Our troops are retreating to the north, strong pressure of tanks, continuous strikes on infantry from the air. Up to Libava on the way of withdrawal there are no equipped positions. At 8 o'clock the enemy took the city of Palanjan. Now the enemy is 30 kilometers from Libava. We are ready for defense. By the tone of the report felt that Klevensky stunned by this development of events. We were also discouraged. The defense of the base from the land plans assigned to the land units, and we believe that if it comes to this the army will repel the blow. Fleet commander called me and the head of the operational department demanded once again to report what is currently in Libava. We listed in addition to two 130mm batteries defending from the south and north of the approaches to the port, there is a 180mm railroad battery. From the air, the base is covered by 6 air defense batteries and the 148th Fighter Aviation Regiment of the Baltic Military District. From the land direction, Libava is defended by the 67th Rifle Division of the 8th Army under the command of Major General N.A. Didaev. This division is strongly stretched along the coast. Well, how can Klevensky help the division? At his disposal is a half crew, a machine gun company and cadets of the Naval Air Defense School, reported Pilipovsky. Komflot hesitated. Not much. And what ships were left there? After the departure of the 1st Submarine Brigade in the base, still remained 15 boats, of which 6 are in repair, 5 should go to Ust-Divinsk, and 3 Little and L3 are on patrol duty. I added that the destroyer Lenin was being repaired in the port of Libavske, and no less than 18 transports were standing by. In addition, 6 torpedo boats, 12 small hunter boats, and the minesweeper Fugas are in service. On Lake Derb is based 43rd Marine Air Reconnaissance Squadron of aircraft MBR-2. I see, said the commander. Check that all the extra ships went to Vindava and Ust-Divinsk. Communication with Libava was interrupted time and again. We had a lot of worries battles were going on at sea and over the sea, but my thoughts kept coming back to Libava. Mikhail Sergeyevich Klevensky, I had no doubt, would do his best. Quite recently, he and I had checked the sea defense of the base in the exercise, in dynamics. Everything was fine then. But will there be enough forces and means to resist the enemy now? In the evening, MS Klevensky again broke through to us on the VHF. I hear close artillery fire. Our southern battery has long been firing at the enemy. All day we are bombed. Now the 20th raid has begun. 4 of our submarines took positions in the sea, according to the plan of sea defense. The minesweeper Fugas is laying mines. 6 submarines have left for Ust-Divinsk and 8 transports for Ventspils. 10 ships so far left in the base. At this point, the telephone connection with Libava for a long time stopped. Komflot called Riga and Moscow, trying to find out the situation of the 8th Army, but no clear picture could be drawn up. As we learned later, already by the evening of June 22nd, Hitler's troops approached the southern outskirts of Libava. By fire of batteries of the base and heroic resistance of our infantry, the fascists were stopped on a boundary of the River Barta in 15 kilometers from a city. Informed us of this Moscow. Fleet commander first rejoiced and then gloomy. The Nazis bombed the army airfield. Fighter Air Regiment managed to fly from it somewhere. The regiment commander reported the situation in Libava. Is that clear? It's clear, but it means that the base was left without fighter cover. A phone call interrupted our conversation. I left the office, but soon Komflot called me again and silently held out a telegram from Moscow. Send all M-type submarines to the area of Memel to defend the flank of our coastal front. I was surprised. But the front is already at Libava. The admiral only waved his hand in reply. Will prepare instructions. A few minutes later he signed a radiogram to the commander of the submarine L3. Fulfilling the order, June 27th, the boat put near Memel mine barrier. Soon 3 transports with Nazi troops perished on these mines. The boat was commanded by Captain 2nd Rank PDD, Grishenko, who afterwards became famous throughout the country for his fighting deeds. It was pointless to send other boats to that area. in fact already in the rear of the front. Conflot reported his opinion to Moscow. They agreed. We had the impression that the General Staff had a poor understanding of the situation at the fronts. Its operational summary said German regular troops during June 22nd fought with the USSR border guards, having little success in some directions. In the afternoon, with the approach of advanced units of the Red Army Field Forces, but the attacks of German troops on the predominant length of our border were repulsed with losses to the enemy. That the enemy suffered heavy losses in this we did not doubt for a moment. We knew our Soviet people, their devotion to the motherland, their fearlessness in battle. But everything else in the telegram was far from the truth and caused only a feeling of annoyance. We received reports about the bombing of Riga and Vindava. Our base Hanko was hit from Finnish airfields. Fortunately, no serious damage. What about Libava? It became known that having failed to break into the city from the south, the fascists bypassed it and are now attacking from the east, from the Grubini area, at night called Rear Admiral P. Train-in. Yesterday evening the 43rd Naval Air Reconnaissance Squadron flew to Riga to Lake Kish. What's the matter? The commander asked. It turns out that the enemy approached Lake Derby east of Libava, where the squadron used to be based, and our seaplanes had to fly to Riga. It became obvious that Libava was surrounded. Soon this was confirmed by MS Klevensky, briefly reporting by radio that the base was already under enemy fire. Parts of the 67th Infantry Division are defending on the outskirts of the city. Through Moscow it was learned that the troops of the 8th Army waging continuous heavy fighting are already retreating to Riga. Libava remains surrounded. Commanders of submarines and transports, which arrived to Ust-Divinsk from Libava, confirmed that the garrison of the encircled base is heroically defending, but its forces are melting with every hour. By the way, later in the documents captured from the enemy was found a record marked June 25th due to stubborn resistance and heavy artillery fire. The offensive of the 291st Infantry Division is suspended. Yes, that was the case. On June 24th, the defenders of Libava soldiers, sailors, cadets, working groups not only stopped, but even counterattacked and somewhat squeezed the Nazis, who had begun to infiltrate into the city. The military council and all of us, officers of the staff, thought about how to help the garrison of Libava. The Navy had no land forces. Send ships to Libava. But all the combat forces of the fleet were busy with mine laying in the Gulf of Finland and the Gulf of Riga. Help with aviation. But all our strike aviation at the request of the front was operating near Riga and in the Luga direction. Libava continued to fight. More than once the base tried to bombard an armoured train of fascists from the area of the railway station Chrobinja. However, it was destroyed by the accurate fire of our naval batteries. From the area of Tosmari factory the enemy was expelled. But although short-lived, the appearance of enemy soldiers near the military harbour played a fatal role. The commander of the repairing destroyer Lenin, Lieutenant Captain Afanasiev, reasonably fearing as if the fascists had not captured the ship, blew it up. As the senior of the group of repaired ships, he for the same reason ordered to blow up and 5 submarines that were in the dock. After that, there were more explosions. The mine storehouse of the base was being destroyed. The commander of the frontier ships detachment and the commander of the raid guard, seeing the destruction of the base, left with their boats to Vindava. As a result, only transports and 5 torpedo boats remained in Libava. The 180mm 4-gun battery, no, 18, the pride of our railway artillery, was in a difficult situation. The enemy surrounded it from all sides. The battery commander Captain Lisetsky acted decisively and boldly. Under the very nose of the enemy, heavy transporters rushed forward. While the enemy recollected, the battery broke out of the ring. On the way the battery was surrounded more than once, fought hand-to-hand battles, repaired the railroad track. Every now and then coming under fire, they advanced through the area occupied by the enemy. The battery was saved. It broke through to Riga, and then together with the units of our army withdrew to the east. The garrison that fought suffered a great loss. The division commander, Major General NND, died. The Diev died. The defense of the city was headed by Captain First Rank MS Klevensky. All night we tried to clarify the situation at Libava. Chief of Fleet Communications Colonel Zernov, usually calm, imperturbable, now nervous, every minute wipes sweaty forehead with a handkerchief. He gets the most. Suddenly I see him running with a sheet in his hand. In a hurry, almost knocked me down. We flew into the commander's office together. Tributes ran his eyes over the telegram. It's not getting any easier by the hour. Immediately took up the telephone receiver, direct connection with the Fleet Aviation Commander, and said briefly, "Now come to the CP." The telegram was from Riga. Trainin reported that from Klevensky received a report 14 kilometers north of Pavloste, enemy landing. It is extremely necessary to help our aviation. There was no time left for clarifications, and clarifications we had to act. 28 of our SB airplanes took to the air, but no landing in the harbour Pavloste did not appear. Apparently someone misled Klevensky. We received an order from the People's Commissar of the Navy Libava should not be surrendered in any case. The garrison of the city fought fiercely. Soldiers and sailors, workers, party and Soviet workers, Komsomol activists, everyone who cared about the Soviet power, went to the firing lines and repulsed frantic attacks of fascists. On the roads leading to Libava, dust clouds were rising. German motorcyclists were rushing forward, counting on a close victory. They saw the suburbs of Libava and anticipated a pleasant vacation. But they were met by friendly fire of Soviet patriots and were drawn into heavy, bloody battles. At the place of Rutsava, the Hitlerites were met by the fighting Komsomol detachment, which was commanded by the secretary of the district committee of LKSM of Latvia, Imants Sudmolis. Together with army units and sailors, Komsomol members repulsed countless enemy attacks. Immortal feats were made in these days by young Latvians. Komsomol member Modris Trimanis crawled with a bunch of grenades to a fascist tank and destroyed it. When fascists landed a parachute landing in the rear of our troops, Komsomol members led by their combat leader Imants Sudmolis rushed to search for the parachutists. All enemy infiltrators were caught or destroyed. Much time later, after Hitlerites broke into the city, they managed to capture the brave leader of the Komsomol detachment. Sudmolis died from tortures, but did not give away his fighting friends, who remained in the Libavian underground. After the war, he was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. At one of the defense sites, a detachment of sailors cadets of naval schools was commanded by Captain 3rd Rank Orlov. A handful of sailors, by fire of machine guns and rifles, grenades and bottles with combustible mixture for several days, repulsed attacks of German infantry and tanks. The sailors let the tanks as close as possible, and then jumped out of trenches and trenches, threw bundles of grenades under the tracks, set fire to the enemy vehicles with a flammable mixture. Many unknown heroes fought at the walls of Libava. Different ways led them to the ranks of the defenders of the city. Petty Officer A. Prostorov served at the Hydro Aerodrome as an aviation mechanic. He equipped airplanes MBR-2 on reconnaissance and bombardment of the enemy. But here Hitlerites approached the Lake D'Urbe, where the hydroaviation was based. The airplanes, having dropped their bomb load on the enemy columns for the last time, were forced to fly to Riga. At the naval airfield remained a petty officer, and with him 11 sailors. Prostorov led his small detachment to Libava. Sailors especially distinguished themselves in the battles of June 26th, when Hitlerites were rushing forward with the greatest fierceness. Prostorov threw off his tunic. His mighty figure in a calfskin coat, with a machine gun raised high above his head, was remembered by all. "Sailors, follow me," rumbled the commander's voice, and the sailors rushed into the counterattack. Petty officer of the first article Kudyakov, Red Fleet Marov, Polchenko did not lag a step behind Prostorov, drawing the rest of the soldiers with their impulse. Women and even children took part in the fights for Libava. Some of them brought ammunition, others helped the wounded, worked in hospitals. On June 27th, fulfilling the order of the Stavka, our troops left Libava. But the fighting in the city continued in the first days of July. Eyewitnesses told that 5 sailors were fighting in one of the houses. They long repulsed attacks of Hitlerites who tried to take them alive. Fighting to the last opportunity, the sailors died under the debris of the building, blown up by the Nazis. Already in our days in these ruins found the remains of heroes and shreds of old Navy clothes. The communications officer on duty said that I was called Klevensky. I rushed to the phone. In the tube heard a distant, indistinct voice. Our report arrived on easel at the headquarters to General Eliseev. I interrupted him in joyful excitement. "Misha, are you alive?" "I think I'm alive." I told him to send a report by telegraph at once, as there was very poor audibility by telephone. An hour later, the report on the last hours of Libava was on my desk. It said that the garrison was withdrawing northward in 2 columns in order to break through to Vindava and organize a new line of defense on the Venta River. The wounded women and children were loaded onto transports. Batteries and other stationary military installations had to be blown up. Not without enemy sorties, someone's evil hand set fire to oil depots ahead of time, and burning oil spilled over the surface of the harbour. We had to take the ships out to sea without waiting for the end of loading. The base commander, headquarters and political department were the last to leave Libava. They left on 2 torpedo boats, No. 17 and No. 47 under the command of the commander of the detachment, Lieutenant Commander Osipov. At Cape Yuzhava they were attacked by 6 German torpedo boats. The unequal battle lasted several hours. Boat No. 17 was lost. Having picked up the survivors from the water, the second boat reached their own. The battle was fought near Vindava. Under the onslaught of the superior enemy, our units were forced to retreat. The enemy was on their heels. On the bank of the western Divina, fierce fights broke out. Few of the defenders of Libava managed to break through to Riga. The majority of sailors and infantrymen remained in the enemy rear, joined the partisans and selflessly fought against the invaders until the liberation of the Baltic by our troops. We never prepared for the evacuation of our bases, and therefore the retreat from Libava was tragic. I will not condemn anyone for this. We reaped the fruits of what we had sown after all. We were going to fight only on foreign territory. The fleet lost Libava, a major naval base of strategic importance. It was hard to reconcile with this thought, but the fact remained. No sooner had we recovered from this blow than a new disaster loomed. The Eighth Army, as it turned out, was not retreating to Riga, and much further east this was confirmed by reports from Moscow, although very late. I was summoned by the fleet commander. No sooner had I closed the door than the admiral said gloomily. Narkom called. There is an order to evacuate the Riga base. In the Latvian capital was already raging fires. The streets heard indiscriminate firing when a division of destroyers under the flag of Rear Admiral VP Drozd returned to the base after the first mine setting. The rest was forgotten. Sailors' ships were in a hurry to take the mines. Everyone was working machinists, artillerymen and communicators. Valentin Petrovich Drozd told me afterwards. Imagine fires and firing getting closer and closer to the port. We don't know who is firing and why. Why fires break out in the port I don't know either. Our military is no longer in the city, nor the police. Some people are spreading rumours that the Germans are about to enter the city. My sailors caught 2 provocateurs at the gates, but who should I give them to? No, it's calmer at sea. As soon as the last mine rolled onto the deck, we immediately gave up the moorings. We felt better at once. And new trials awaited us at sea. The ships were attacked by enemy aircraft and torpedo boats. The destroyer Storozhavoy had its nose torn off by a torpedo. Sailors with great difficulty kept the ship afloat. On a tugboat it was brought to the base. For 2 outings, destroyers put 500 mines barrage. According to our intelligence, 3 Nazi minesweepers were soon blown up on them, which were carrying hundreds of soldiers heading to Ventspils. In July, mine-laying in Urban was resumed by ships based on Moonsund. In connection with the evacuation of Riga, we faced difficult tasks. The enemy mined huge areas of the sea. We had nothing to minesweep with not enough minesweepers. And in Riga stood the cruiser Kirov and large loaded transports. Only Mukhu Vein Strait remained free of mines, but it was shallow for such deep-sea ships. In addition, during the First World War, Russian sailors sank a transport with cement here, thus blocking the enemy's passage to the Gulf of Finland. After much deliberation, the fleet commander decided to urgently deepen the fairway and thereby provide ships exit from the Gulf of Riga. Hydrographers were summoned to the headquarters, as well as dredging specialists from the commercial port. The commander explained to them the importance and urgency of the upcoming work. Specialists at first named completely unacceptable terms, although they proceeded from quite reasonable calculations. But the situation demanded to abandon peaceful norms. By order of the Conflot, they created a detachment of dredging shells and special auxiliary vessels. The detachment moved on the way under the protection of warships. The works in the strait were not interrupted neither day nor night. Sailors of dredgers did not leave their places for days. There were no breaks for lunch, dinner, or sleep. Food was brought to the battle stations. The weather was in alliance with us. Visibility worsened, and at night a thick fog came. People rejoiced at the gloomy sky. There was less danger of air raids. Fascist intelligence, of course, found the ships crowded in the strait, but apparently did not figure out their true purpose. The titanic labor brought its results. Narrow, shallow strait turned into a navigable highway. At first, ships with a shallow draft passed through it, boats, destroyers, small transports. The attempt of fascist aviation to bomb them at the crossing was not successful. The situation with deep-seated transports was worse. Without waiting for the end of dredging works, the sailors began to transfer cargoes to other ships. For 3 days, the transport's second 5-year plan was unloaded while it was able to pass the shallow places of the fairway. One by one, the transports left the trap and headed for Tallinn. The cruiser Kirov, the powerful icebreaker Keke, Voldemars and several transports with a large draft remained at the roadstead. We had to hurry. From hour to hour, we expected massive raids of fascist aviation. Guiding of the main ships was appointed for the evening of June 29th, when in the northern part of the fairway work was not yet over. In the most dangerous places, hydrographers put small buoys with a limited range of blue light. P. Drozd, who led the conduct of the cruiser, told me that any combat trip, any fight with the enemy for him was easier than that anxious night. At first we were working with our own machines, Valentin Petrovich told me. Then suddenly the red sand under the stern stirred up and all kinds of mud appeared. The machines were stopped. The hull of the cruiser touched the ground, and the grinding sound went straight to the heart. We on the bridge even shrank back. But we had to hurry before it got dark. Again we give the smallest stroke forward. The cruiser moved slowly, navigating by the faint lights of buoys. We strove to follow the fairway exactly. And yet at midnight again felt the shock, and the cruiser sat tightly on the stone bank. We stopped the course, and then how many towing lines were broken? We did everything we could. The nose of the cruiser was stubbornly sitting on the shoal. Only after 3 hours we got off the bank and went further. The next day the dredging works in the northern part of the strait were finished, and the cruiser passed the most dangerous place. It was safely followed by all transports and icebreakers. The 1st Submarine Brigade also passed safely to Tallinn. When Kirov passed the last fairway marks, all the ships, boats, tugs and dredgers were shouting hurrah, waving their caps and visors joyfully. The will, endurance and diligence of Soviet people won. The most valuable ships were saved. They went to the Gulf of Finland and stood in defense of Tallinn. The next day we received an order from the People's Commissar of the Navy to organize a detachment of ships consisting of 4 destroyers, 2 patrol ships and several minesweepers based in Moonsunda for the defense of the islands and the Gulf of Riga, as well as for mine laying and actions on enemy communications in the southern part of the Gulf. Fulfilling this order, we met with new difficulties, because the Moonsund archipelago had no anti-aircraft and mine protection, and most importantly, there was no fuel and fresh water for the ships. We had to think a lot about solving this problem. We had a lot of worries, but the heavy thought did not leave our heads. What happened at the front? Why are we retreating? Only 10 days of war, and we lost Libava, Riga, and it was time to think about the defense of our main base. Fighting off attacks. On the morning of July 6th, the head of the operations department told me, giving me the latest bulletin. The enemy occupied Ainaži. His motorized infantry and tanks are approaching Pärnu. The Estonian authorities are urgently evacuating the port of Pärnu. I read the telegram and asked, "Are there any of our units between Parnu and Tallinn?" Pilipovsky looked at me perplexed. "You know there are no units there at all." "Take the map. Let's go to the commander." We report the telegram to the commander. He silently looks at the map, then picks up the telephone. He calls Leningrad, Moscow. He asks insistently, "Who will defend Tallinn from the land?" "The Navy has no land forces. Both from Leningrad and Moscow, the answer is the same. You are covered by the 8th Army. Conflot size. I heard that when the enemy approached the western Divina. Now he is in Estonia, moving towards Tallinn, and we still do not know what the 8th Army is doing." The Military Council of the Fleet appealed to the government of the Estonian SSR for help in organizing the defense of the capital of the Republic. The Central Committee of the Party and the Council of People's Commissars of Estonia put at our disposal all the necessary means for the creation of engineering structures. The soldiers of the garrison went up to build the fortifications. 25,000 citizens took up crowbars and shovels. All construction organizations of the city with their equipment and stock of materials were mobilized. The chief of the engineering department of the fleet, military engineer of the first rank Konovalov, a first-class expert in fortification, was in charge of all these works. Tallinn turned into a front city, strict quiet, with patrols on the streets and checking passes in the evenings. 3 frontiers were being built: the main defensive line 9 to 12 kilometers from the city, the second line on the outskirts, the third in the city itself, on the approaches to the harbours and piers. People worked selflessly, often under enemy bombardment. In the city, hastily formed infantry units from sailors who came off the ships and volunteer workers. To help our land forces, the fleet headquarters prepared a sea landing. It was to land from ships in the rear of the enemy in the area of Parnu. To establish communication with the 8th Army, we, with the Chief of Intelligence, Major Frumkin, and the representative of the Central Committee of the Party of Estonia, Bukharev, went to the army headquarters, which, according to our information, was 50 to 60 kilometers southeast of Tallinn. We left in a passenger car. In an hour we arrived in the supposed area of the headquarters location, but found no one there. There was not a living soul in the surrounding farms. It was as if everything had died out. Though it alarmed us, we decided to drive a little further to the southeast. The tall forest encircled the highway. It was dark and cool, like a mountain gorge. Our car came around a corner and almost hit a green barrier. The road turned out to be littered with huge pine trees. The chauffeur braked sharply. We jumped out with automatic rifles and lay down in a roadside ditch. The forest was thick, dark, impenetrable. And then I thought how thoughtless it was to go with operational documents without a solid guard. In those days the front line was changing rapidly, and everything could be expected. There was an ominous silence around us, and somewhere in the distance we could hear gunshots. We lay there, silent, listening. The first to break the silence was the young, energetic Bukharev. "It's a stupid situation." "What shall we do, Admiral?" We lay down a little longer. Then we got out of the ditch, approached the rubble. The cut pines are lying in a heap. It would take dozens of men to pull them apart. The chauffeur with difficulty turned our long Z's on the narrow highway, and we drove back. It turned out that it was only a coincidence that saved us from disaster. At that time a fire truck with armed soldiers was coming from Narva to Tallinn. It diverted the attention of the bandits, who had ambushed us near a forest blockage. The firemen bravely entered the battle and, although they suffered losses, won the fight. Many of the bandits they shot, and the rest fled. We had to deal with bandit gangs more and more often. They were local nationalists who had been hiding in the underground during the Soviet regime. There were also guests from abroad. As it turned out later, by the beginning of the war, Hitlerites had created in Finland detachments of volunteers from Estonian emigrant fascists. Having undergone special training, the first detachment Erna I landed in the north of Estonia on July 9, 1941, from Finnish fishing boats. Another squad, Erna II, led by a German intelligence officer, was delivered by airplanes and dropped by parachute on a swamp in the Kortla area. These gangs quickly grew at the expense of the Kaitselites Estonian fascists, and soon they already included about 2,000 scoundrels. Knowing the terrain well, Kaitselites helped Hitlerites in every possible way. They destroyed our communication lines, blew up bridges, created debris on the roads, attacked our units. Unfortunately, we did not immediately recognize this danger. This is the only way to justify our careless forest trip. Returning to Tallinn, we received a telegram from the headquarters of the 8th Army. It turns out that he was already far east of the place where we were looking for him. The hastily formed rifle units received combat tasks. On July 30th, the naval detachment under the command of Colonel I.G. Kostikov went to the front. It all consisted of old serving sailors. They were tall, brave and cheerful guys, truly Russian bogatirs. The detachment firmly settled on the highway Pärnu-Tallinn and delayed here the advance of the enemy, which gave us the opportunity to complete new formations for the defense of the city and build the necessary engineering obstacles. The situation was becoming more complicated every day, but the high morale of sailors and officers on shore and on ships remained unchanged. The faith in the victory of our cause was strengthening. Fleet party organizations conducted tireless educational work. In these difficult days, the desire of people to connect their lives with the party and Komsomol increased even more. In July, the party organizations received 4 times more applications for admission to the party than in June. All these applications were imbued with the deepest sense of patriotism. Sailors wrote from the bottom of their hearts the following words: "I want to die for the motherland as a communist. I believe that only with the party we will win. Lenin's cause is immortal. Death to the fascist bastards." Hundreds and thousands of these stirring human documents were considered at party meetings. To cover Tallinn from the south, in the Pärnu and Paldis directions, the fleet commander ordered Colonel T.M. Parafilo to set up a barrier to the south of Margam consisting of 1 battalion of a separate brigade of Marines, and to the north the other 3 battalions of the same brigade took up positions. This created some depth of land defence in this area. The Paldiski area was covered so far only by the men of the construction battalion. Our forces in this direction were small, but still the road to Tallinn and Paldiski was covered. Fleet units and NKVD units were gradually deployed around Tallinn. The Estonian government began to create national formations. Who would unite all these forces and lead the land defence of the base? The position of the commander of the main base did not exist at that time. Therefore, the fleet headquarters had to pay more and more attention to the fighting on land. In the second half of July, the enemy approached Narva. The commander of the 8th Army asked us to support the infantry with fire from the sea. The Soviet units, which were retreating eastward along the coast, had almost no tanks. Their artillery was also weak. We understood this and tried to help the army men in any way we could. To send ships to shell the coast, we had to find at least 2 pairs of minesweepers for controlled trawling of the area of the firing position and approaches to it. We found these trawlers. For their trawls the next day, destroyer Surovi, under the command of Captain 2nd Rank V. F. Andreev went to the intended position. Since dawn he was firing at the advancing enemy. Then the destroyer was replaced by gunboat Red Banner. The accurate fire of 6-inch guns of the artillery ship, a veteran of our fleet, inflicted great damage to the fascists and delayed their advance on the seaside section of the front, near Narva. We understood how important it was to stop the enemy at least for a short time, so that our land forces could gain a foothold on the new frontier. Sailors always gladly and eagerly fulfilled the requests of the army men. Dozens of grateful radiograms received ships from the infantry. Often crushing fire from the sea fell on the enemy in the most critical minutes for our troops. Almost before each responsible firing on the shore, the flagship artilleryman of the fleet, Captain 1st Rank N.E. Fennan, personally checked the training of the ship's gunners, the organization of fire correction, did not forget to inspect the guns themselves. Take care of every shell. Ammunition, thrown into God's light like a penny, only raises the enemy's temper. Nikolai Eduardovich instructed young lieutenants, however, already commanding combat units. He always spoke calmly, slowly and confidently. Remember that the main thing is not the speed of fire, but a good adjustment of fire. Captain 3rd Rank Barinov, the assistant to the flag officer on anti-aircraft artillery, was no less demanding. He also spent a lot of time on the ships, teaching, checking, helping with advice and demonstration. Hundreds of firings were conducted by the fleet ashore. Their high efficiency testified to the fact that our flag officer and his assistants did not devote so much time and effort to their wards in vain. To strengthen the defence of our communications and approaches to Kronstadt, the fleet began in July to create an eastern mine position in the area of the islands Gotland-Seskar. The fulfillment of this task was entrusted to a specially formed in Kronstadt detachment of ships under the command of Rear Admiral Y.F. Rawle. Y.F. Rawle was a great specialist in mine warfare. He was the head of the combat training department in the People's Commissariat of the Navy, but in the first days of the war asked to send him to his native Baltic fleet, where he spent a good half of his life. Always serious, focused, Yuri Fedorovich was a deeply educated sailor and a strong-willed, authoritative chief. He took up the task with all his energy. Almost every night the ships left Kronstadt to lay mines. The most difficult and dangerous of them was led at sea by Y.F. Rawle himself. We continued to strengthen our mines in the mouth of the Gulf of Finland. More than once I had to be on the ships during the loading of mines. Sailors worked with special enthusiasm, dexterously, skillfully. Mine barriers Oka and Ural were rightfully considered to be the best ships in terms of training and cohesion of the crews. Minzags participated in all mine-laying operations of the first days of the war. They were often hit by enemy bombardments, and once they were shelled by a 12-inch battery of the Finnish Fort Makiluoto, but everything went safely thanks to the endurance and skill of the commander. On the Okas served capable young navigators K.M. Kononov and V.K. Tarasov. K. Tarasov, artilleryman L.X., Lindemann M.I., Zakharov F.N. Reznichenko. In the fact that the ship became the Guards, a great merit of these officers. But not everywhere our mine-laying operations went smoothly. Once, with a load of mines, went to the Gulf of Riga detachment of 3 destroyers and 2 patrol ships. It was commanded by Captain First Rank Koroshkin, who kept his flag on the patrol ship Tucha. In the covering detachment were 2 destroyers Strong and Angry, also loaded with mines. Our aerial reconnaissance before this reported that the enemy in the bay is not. And suddenly we intercepted the radio, transmitted from the destroyers to the commander of the detachment Koroshkinu, that in Urban found a German auxiliary cruiser and 2 destroyers type Jaguar. This stunned us at headquarters. Where could a cruiser with destroyers appear in the strait if they were neither at sea, nor in Vindava, nor in Libava? However, the report was on the table. Reported to the fleet commander. He ordered our aviation to bombard the fascist ships. Bombers of Colonel Krokhalov, hero of the Soviet Union, immediately flew to the specified area. And there was already a battle. True, neither cruiser nor destroyers at the enemy was not. There were only a floating base and 2 minesweepers. But they were the first to open fire, and all our ships were stuffed with mines. To fight in such a position is more than risky. And yet the destroyers of the covering squadron opened fire from the extreme distance. Under the cover of a smoke screen, the enemy began to withdraw. But one enemy shell still hit the stern of the destroyer Strong. From the explosion ignited a smoke bomb, and then one of the mines. The fire could spread to other mines, and then the ship would have died. Wounded Senior Red Ensign I.P. Yuloshenko, Petty Officer of the 2nd Article V. Karpov, Senior Red Ensign V. S. Alexandrov and Lieutenant S. Alexandrov and Lieutenant M.Y. Gorovoy rushed to the place of fire. They threw overboard a burning sabre, managed also to throw overboard a blazing hot ball of mine. The explosion was prevented and the ship was saved. Captain First Rank Koroshkin, having received a report on the discovery of the enemy cruiser, ordered his ships to withdraw and dump the mines, so that, freed from the dangerous cargo, to engage in battle with all forces. But the enemy at once lay on a reverse course. From the fire of 2 destroyers of our advanced detachment, and from the impact of bomber aviation the fascist ships received significant damage. They had fires, but still they went to Riga. And our mine setting failed. Mines were dropped to the south of Svorby Peninsula. We returned to Moonsund. Well, one learns from mistakes, but we were convinced more than once what golden men on our ships. 4 sailors of the Strong were awarded the Order of the Red Banner for their courage and determination in eliminating the fire. We had a dispute in the headquarters. Could Captain 2nd Rank G.S. Abashvili, commander of the cover group, rush to attack the enemy, having on the decks of both destroyers full stock of mines? Of course, this is madness after all. The slightest splinter, hit the mine, could raise the entire ship in the air. After all, so a little bit, and did not happen with Strong. Another thing, if the cover squad was free of mines. In this case, he was obliged to destroy the Nazi ships. He had a clear advantage in artillery. Yes, in an effort to quickly do away with mine-laying, we overdid it, turning all destroyers into mine barriers, and in fact, leaving the squadron without cover ships. We learned a lesson from this incident. Operational duty Captain 3rd Rank V. I, Andreev, brought me an urgent report of our land reconnaissance. The enemy broke through to the area of Mariam. I am used to seeing Andreev restrained, judicious. Now he is visibly worried the Nazis are only 60 kilometers from Tallinn. At the commander I catch a new member of the military council of the fleet N.K. Smirnov, chief of the rear Michigan Moskalenko, and chief of intelligence N.S. Frumkin. Divisional Commissar Nikolai Konstantinovich Smirnov, an experienced political officer. We were familiar with him in the joint service in the Baltic in his younger years. Conflot preoccupied measuring the land map with a circular. Yes, we can't delay. It is decided to raise on alert all construction units and a brigade of Marines Colonel Parafilo and send them to the area of Mariam at the roadstead to deploy the fleet so that the ships can freely maneuver and fire on the shore. All ships are ordered to allocate landing parties. For years, the fleet has been preparing for battle on the high seas to repel enemy landings and support the maritime flanks of the army. But where is this notorious flank now, if the 8th Army is continuously retreating, and we don't even know how to find its headquarters? Tallinn is preparing to fight back. The ships have taken their positions on the roadstead. The Central Committee of the party and the Estonian government have called on the communists and all workers to take up arms. The city has frozen. Not a single light. The population strictly observes the rules of camouflage, but somewhere in the streets you can hear incomprehensible, still rare shooting. Fascist spies from local nationalists are acting. Panic rumors are spreading in the city. Fascist youths call us on the phone, threaten us, gloat. Sometimes they succeed in spreading fear and nervousness. The local authorities of Haapsalu city, located 100 kilometers from Marjam, hurried to burn the railway station, warehouses, fuel supplies, destroyed all the tracks. The intention to leave nothing for the enemy is commendable, but it is a misfortune when it is carried out prematurely. With the destruction of the railroad station, we lost telephone and telegraph communication with Rohukula and access roads to this important port for us. The ships based here, we were forced to transfer to the island of Easel. Soon the 249th Rifle Regiment and the Marine Brigade concentrated in the area of Marjama. And this immediately brought results. The fascist troops stopped. They hastily pulled up here their motorized infantry and self-propelled artillery. But these units were already on the march under the blows of our aviation and suffered heavy losses. For several days there were persistent battles. The Navy formed all new rifle units. They were immediately sent to the area of Mariam. One early morning I was awakened by Colonel Zernov. He was glowing. There is a connection with the headquarters of the 8th Army. Here is a telegram. From it became clear that the Army Command received all our messages. The danger looming under the main base, understands and will take all measures to stop the enemy. This telegram encouraged us very much. Although we were well aware of the difficult situation of the 8th Army, of the heavy losses it had suffered, still it was a powerful neighbour, whose mere presence infused us with new strength. Soon we felt that the army lives and acts. It was able to block the way of the enemy. Its units, which remained near Tallinn, are fighting steadfastly. Under the blows of infantrymen and sailors, the fascists began to withdraw from Marjam. Our ships continued to operate in the Gulf of Riga. From all points of view, the Moonsund archipelago was a key position in our theatre. Light forces, destroyers and patrol ships were laying mines in the urban strait, based on Moonsund. We were well aware that with the occupation of Libava, Vindava and Riga, the fascists will try to use the sea routes to supply their troops in the Baltics. Our task was to disrupt these transportations. The enemy daily conducted aerial reconnaissance of the Straits of Moonsund, followed our ships there. Rear Admiral Drozd was always expecting airstrikes. To protect the ships from them, he developed a special disposition, maintained constant communication with the fighter aviation, based at the airfield on the island of Ezel. The ships were always ready to drop anchor to repel enemy aircraft attacks on the move, having freedom of maneuver. This good solution required a large consumption of fuel, which was delivered by sea from Tallinn. Acceptance of fuel was carried out by ships at the roadstead, which was associated with serious difficulties and a lot of time. Therefore, not all ships could participate in the fulfillment of combat missions. But we had to put up with these difficulties. We rejoiced that at Marjama the enemy was stopped. But a new trouble awaited us. We received a report from Ezel from the head of the island garrison, General Elisiv. The enemy fired artillery fire at our boats from the Virtsu Peninsula. The reconnaissance sent there found enemy infantry and 120mm battery. Where could the Hitlerites appear there? We asked General Elisiv to clarify the situation. The next day he reported that the enemy from the same area shelled Kuivastu Pier, and with shells of larger caliber. 2 RMBR-2 airplanes bombed this battery, and fighter aviation stormed motorcyclists and infantry, conducted fire and our battery. The enemy was silenced. We look at the map and are amazed, how could the enemy penetrate here? Our reconnaissance continued to find out the situation. The commander called the chief of intelligence. Frumkin, report what's going on in the Virtsu area. And the major himself was lost in conjecture. It was not his fault that the operators did not pay attention to the report that on July 9th enemy soldiers had been detected northwest of Pärnu on the road to Virtsu. At that time no one paid any attention to this report. But now it turned out that a battalion of motorized infantry, tanks and self-propelled artillery had been deployed on the peninsula. Now they are already shelling our destroyers on the Mufu-Vienne roadstead. Later it turned out that several fascist self-propelled guns, accompanied by tanks and a detachment of motorized infantry, had rolled from Pärnu to the eastern shore of the strait to Virtsu Wharf on an excellent highway overnight. Of course, through their Kate-Light agents, the Nazis knew perfectly well that there were no Soviet soldiers in the whole area, so they moved quite freely. Virtsu Peninsula is located in the narrowest part of the strait against Kuivastu Wharf on the island of Ezel. Therefore, the German guns could shoot the entire strait, and most importantly, the fairway on which our ships travelled. With this we could not reconcile. The fleet commander ordered Major General Elisiv urgently landing sailors with the support of ships to destroy the Nazi battery in the area of Virtsu. The task was not easy. Obviously, we had to first make a reconnaissance of the landing site. After all, we did not know what forces Hitlerites have on the peninsula. Finally, it was necessary to form a special landing detachment to prepare its fighters, to organize interaction with the allocated ships and aviation. All this required time, and while each ship passing through the strait was exposed to the Nazi battery fire. Drozd organized a special smoke in the fairway at the time of passage of ships. It helped not a single enemy shell did not hit the target. But to go in a cloud of smoke, listening to the whistle of shells and the rumble of their close bursts is not a pleasant occupation, especially when you consider that the ships, usually loaded to capacity with mines, passed only 4 kilometers from the enemy battery. Coastal artillery Ezel many times fired on the peninsula, trying to destroy the enemy guns, but those, apparently all the time changing positions, and cover them failed. Rear Admiral Drozd told me, returning from the mine laying. When approaching Virts, I commanded full speed. Guns to starboard, and the sailors joked, now the Nazis will start a salute in our honour, and then everything goes on, as if by Note's salute of fascists, our answer to them and smoke screen from the boats. 20 minutes later we are at anchor, home. And so it was every time we entered and left the strait. Major General Elisiv difficult task is fulfilled. On the night of July 18th, 3 of our coastal batteries from the islands of Adel and Muku opened fire on the enemy, and by 3 o'clock finished the artillery preparation of the landing area. A composite battalion of sailors then landed on the Virtsu Peninsula. 3 of our destroyers supported the landing. By 10 a.m. The whole area was back in our hands. Since July 18th, we generally began to breathe easier. The Hitlerites' frantic attack on Tallinn was clearly beginning to lose its initial strength. Parts of the 10th Rifle Corps of the 8th Army, together with units of the fleet, finally cleared the Marjama area from the fascists and even began to push the enemy southward to Pärnu. For a long time we fixed a more or less clear front line from Pärnu to Tartu. The door from the rear to the main base of our fleet was slammed in front of the enemy's nose. We bought time to create land defences for the base and to form a large number of new rifle units from the fleet personnel to support the regular army units. During these hard days of fighting on the land defences, dozens of our submarines took up positions all over the Baltic. We waited with great hope for the results of their combat activity. However, the first reports from the sea saddened us. The submarine warfare was also not as planned in our plans. Submarine commanders searched for the enemy, repeatedly met his convoy, but those consisted of small ships and went under the coast at extremely shallow depths, where our boats could not come within torpedo salvo distance. There were other difficulties. They were revealed during a conversation with boat commanders who had just returned from their positions. I remember how the commander of the Sheikh 311, with frustration and indignation, reported, "Comrade Rear Admiral, it hurts to the point of pain. I clearly saw the fascist transports, but they were in Swedish territorial waters and under the reinforced protection of patrol ships." Always lively and witty, the commander of the 2nd Submarine Brigade, Aoral, with a serious look, asked, "Could it be that they were travelling along the very edge of territorial waters?" The boat commander did not catch the irony and continued, "We are categorically forbidden to violate the neutrality of Sweden, and the fascists cover themselves with the Swedish flag, and we can do nothing with them. What claims could there be against the submariners? Apparently we, the leaders who planned submarine warfare, had to think about everything. Yes, we will continue to stay out of Sweden's territorial waters. We will respect its neutrality. But on the high seas we must sink the enemy without a miss." The submariners suffered their first losses. On July 21st, late in the evening, I was informed about the entry of submarines M94 and M98 into the Gulf of Finland. Both boats had been standing in Tringy Bay on the north shore of Isle before going out. Before going to sea, they were escorted by patrol boats and minesweepers. At first everything went well. Both boats safely passed the Sawela-Vane Strait and turned north into the Gulf of Finland. But at 9 o'clock in the morning of July 22nd, the observation post at the Rissna lighthouse reported that a high column of water rose above one of the submarines. The observers heard a deafening long explosion. It turns out that the little one was attacked by the Nazi submarine U-149, which was in position in the area. The explosion of the torpedo destroyed the stern of the boat M94. It sat on the ground. Only the bow of the boat was sticking out of the water. Luckily for us, the sea was calm. Lieutenant Captain N.N.E. Bezubikov, the commander of the other little boat, immediately sent a rubber inflatable dinghy to the place of the disaster. The commander of M94, Senior Lieutenant N.V. Dyakov, the commander of the steering department Kompanits, and the foreman of the engine crew Laptiv, who were on the bridge at the time of the explosion, were thrown overboard. With great difficulty they swam to the bow of the boat out of the water, where they were found by sailors who came to their aid. While saving their comrades, the M98 submariners almost died themselves. Their boat was also attacked by the enemy. Fortunately, the torpedo passed by. At 10 o'clock, the bow part of the damaged boat was submerged in water. But in the half-submerged compartments were 8 sailors and engineer Captain Lieutenant Vises Shiliev. The officer announced to the sailors that he was taking command of the ship and assured them that everyone would be saved. All that was needed was calmness and diligence. The sailors were given individual rescue apparatus. Shiliev checked whether everyone knew how to use them. On his order, all sailors gathered in the fighting deckhouse, closed the lower deckhouse hatch. Now it was necessary to unscrew the flooding valve, but it, as it turned out, jammed. Finally opened. The cabin was filled with water, threw back the hatch cover, and everyone went to the surface. The last to leave the ship was Engineer Captain Lieutenant Shiliev. A barge approached from the shore and picked up the submariners. No matter how sad was the case of submarine ships' destruction, I admired the calmness and courage of our submariners, thanks to which they were saved. 9 days later, we met the returning from the campaign underwater minesweeper L3 commanded by Captain 3rd Rank P. D. Grishenko. This boat in the previous voyage very successfully put out a mine bank in the area of Memel. It blew up and killed 3 Nazi ships. And here is a new campaign. P.D. Grishenko told us in detail about the actions of his ship. On July 15th, L3 together with S8 left Tallinn. Before entering the Baltic Sea, both boats were escorted by minesweepers and 2 airplanes, Sea Scouts MBR-2. Having arrived safely in the area of Cape Blusterort in the southern part of the Baltic Sea, P.D. Grishenko made 2 days of persistent and meticulous reconnaissance on himself. The commander of the submarine barrier wanted to put mines where enemy ships are sure to run into them. The boat walked for a long time, changing courses. The commander's persistence was successful. On the 3rd day of the search, acoustician reported that he hears the noise of propellers. The commander went to approach and soon saw in the periscope 2 trawlers. They were moving with a trawl. Having determined the course of the Nazi ships, P.D. Grishenko turned around and went 2 cable meters ahead of the minesweepers. It was a daring decision. An hour later, told Grishenko, the minesweepers turned on the reverse course. So did we. And in another hour, when the minesweepers turned around again, we snuck under them, followed their trawl, and began to put mines in the strip they had trawled. We, of course, guessed that they had trawled the path of some of their ships. By 15 o'clock the laying was finished, and having made sure that none of the mines had floated, we moved away from the fairway and stopped the cars. The acousticians were continuously listening to the sea, and just before dinner, at 18:00, everybody in the boat heard a great explosion. Hurrah, hurrah went through the boat. There was no end to the joy. It's the first, joked the submariners, and there were still some goodies left for others. The boat had to leave here as quickly as possible. Therefore, the sailors did not hear the second explosion, they learned about it later. On the mines put by the Soviet boat, another fascist transport exploded and died. When returning from the position at Cape Steinnorth, the fascists discovered the boat and for almost a whole day pursued and bombed it. L3 was damaged but did not lose its fighting ability and came safely to the base. Many damages were repaired on the move. The work was led by Engineer Captain Lieutenant M.A. Krastelev, a talented and experienced specialist. Soviet submariners withstood the tests with honor. The soul of the crew were communists, led by the commissar of the ship, senior political officer A.I. Bakhanov. Our submarines, aviation and surface ships kept the enemy in constant fear. I remember, came to me the head of intelligence N.S. Frumkin, joyful, radiant. I have information that the enemy panic closed all the main Skerries fairways. 1 German submarine has already died. Having signed another report to the General Staff in Moscow, I look at the smiling Major. Comrade Frumkin. Even if your information, as the scouts say, requires clarification and verification, I still thank you for the message. Everything goes to that not today, so tomorrow we will begin to beat the enemy properly. And the Gulf of Riga is ours. Heavy news came to us from different parts of the land front. On July 11th, the Finns penetrated deeply into our defences in the Petrozavodsk direction. On the Leningrad direction, Pskov was abandoned, and the fighting was already in the territory of the Leningrad region. The 8th Army, as a result of long days and bloody battles, was pushed back by the enemy to the north, and was cut off from the main forces of the Soviet Army. Front reports we received in the headquarters at night. By morning they were processed, put on the map to report to the fleet commander. We used to listen to the report of the operational duty officer on the headquarters, very lively and active Lieutenant Captain Lukyanchikov, and silently follow the tip of his pencil. The front line was moving closer and closer to Leningrad. Everyone understood that a deadly threat was looming over our beloved city, the cradle of the revolution. And how are things at Vyborg? I ask. The tone of the duty officer becomes more cheerful. There are no special changes here. 50th Rifle Corps, 23rd Army is firmly holding its position. Fire support it provides from the Vyborg Bay, our detachment of Skerries. We were reassured by the famous reasoning of the great naval commander Admiral S.O. Makarov. No matter how hard it is for us in battle, we never know exactly how hard at the same time, and the enemy. After we learned that Hitlerites really had a hard time here. Despite the difficult situation of our troops, they inflicted huge damage to the enemy. The situation on land was alarming for us. But we did our job. Ships and naval aviation almost every night mined the fairways of the enemy in the Finnish Skerries, in Obenski Strait, and in the eastern part of the Gulf of Riga. These daring actions were successful, stealthy, and without losses. A lot of attention was taken from us to ensure the conduct of our convoys along the routes Tallinn-Kronstadt and Tallinn-Moonsund. We were discouraged by cases of blowing up our ships, even when they were following the minesweepers. Why do not the minesweepers destroy mines? Indignantly asked the fleet commander at the flagship Mineral Captain 2nd Rank Tulinov. He shrugged his shoulders. We do everything, but for some reason it does not work. Urgently summoned from Leningrad the most qualified experts in the fight against mines. Captain 1st Rank Ivan Alexievich Kariev, an old sailor, a great expert in minesweeping, who had sailed on minesweepers during the First World War, came with them. Having familiarized with all the cases of blowing up the ships following the trawls, mine gods at once confidently declared Hitlerites use special mines, electromagnetic and acoustic. We need special trawls. But let me ask the commander, where can we get these trawls? It turned out that the Marine Scientific and Technical Committee has long developed domestic electromagnetic and acoustic trawls. They have already passed all the tests and received the highest marks. Now both trawls are being further improved, Kariev calmly explained. This reference amazed us all. We, it turns out, have good trawls, but we want to make them even better. And meanwhile our ships are being blown up and sunk, and people are dying. The fleet commander requested through Moscow at least 2 copies of electromagnetic and acoustic trawls. A few days later a wooden trawler with an electromagnetic trawl came to Tallinn from the Scientific and Technical Committee. We let it into the very thick of mines. It worked perfectly. The newest magnetic mines exploded far beyond its stern. Soon a second ship came in. There were no more electromagnetic minesweepers yet. If only we'd gotten such wooden boats before the war. They would have saved dozens of ships and hundreds of human lives. We in the headquarters understood perfectly well that the enemy would try to widely use the Obenski Strait for their maritime transportation. That's why we mined the strait, sent here submarine patrols, kept destroyers in Moonsund, torpedo boats at Minchu Pier, and a squadron of bomber aviation at Kagul airfield on the island of Isle. The shore-based 180mm battery on the Svorby Peninsula was also aimed at the strait. Planes of the 73rd Air Regiment were conducting a continuous reconnaissance of the area. I was not once present at the telephone conversations between the fleet commander and the commandant of the island area, Elisiv. Alexei Borisovich asked Komflot, "How are things in Urban?" The general invariably replied, "Everything is in order, the reconnaissance flew, the enemy was not detected. Observers of our battery are also both watching the strait. Once again check the readiness of torpedo boats and aviation. Do not miss the convoy." A few minutes later, a similar conversation took place on the phone with the new commander of the fleet aviation, General M.I. Samokin. He usually answered, "Do not miss. We will strike." And it had to happen. On July 11th and 12th, operational air reconnaissance at sea was not conducted, as the entire 73rd Air Regiment carried out combat missions on the land front. Not without reason, says the proverb, where there is thin, there is torn. On July 12th, the commander of our heavy battery on the peninsula Svorby, Captain Stiebel, suddenly reported that he was shelled by 3 Nazi destroyers. The Nazis were shooting badly. There were a lot of underflights. Of course, artillery medium-caliber destroyers no damage to the turret battery could not bring. This is like an elephant mosquito bites. But the very fact of brazen enemy sortie forced to think. General Elisiv was called. He added nothing new. The destroyers appeared, shot and disappeared from sight. In the afternoon, from the airfield of Kagul flew our fighter plane for reconnaissance of the strait. As already mentioned, we had no other airplanes that day. Every 10 minutes I call the duty officer on communications and ask if there are no reports from the scout. No, nothing has been heard so far. We look at the map of the Gulf of Riga, as if it could tell us something. Just before dinner, the duty communications officer came running. There's a big convoy in Urban. Together with the commander read the report. At 15 hours 35 minutes, the fighter found 42 ships guarded by 8 destroyers, 3 patrol ships and a large number of torpedo and patrol boats. A bomber unit on duty flew out to bombard the area. The battery of the Peninsula Svorby firing. Find out what forces can be a decisive blow to the enemy convoy. Torpedo boats on the island of Isel were not ready to go. 5 destroyers in Moon Sunda, after a trip to the Urbensky Strait, take fuel from barges and tankers, and will be able to go to sea only at midnight. The commander of the detachment of light forces, Rear Admiral Drozd, who was in Tallinn, urges the commander of the fleet to allow immediately go to Moonsunda with 2 destroyers, Stierigushi and Angry. Conflot gives the OK, and both destroyers at full steam go to sea. VP Drozd contacted by radio with all his ships and orders them at 3 hours 30 minutes to be at Karasar. We at headquarters follow the unfolding of events. Something to think about. The enemy is detected at 15.35. We at headquarters learned about it 2 hours later, and destroyers from Moonsunda will leave only at 4 a.m., in other words, 10 hours after the discovery of the convoy. That's what it means, not to have a systematic reconnaissance, secured fleet anchorage, well-organized supply. And communications today did not work very well. Fleet commander orders an immediate airstrike on the convoy with all possible forces. 24 bombers took off from the airfield and took a course to the sea. At 20.00 received a report from the submarine S-102 at Cape Kolkasrags detected a large convoy. Enemy ships go under the very shore in shallow places. Watching the operator, Captain Lieutenant Ovechkin, putting the convoy's location on the map, Pilipovsky, head of the operations department, slowly said with annoyance, "Cape Kolkasrags is the end of the strait." And I immediately understood Grigory Yefimovich's thought the enemy had already passed the strait. He had only 60 miles to Riga, 6 to 7 hours to go. Why are the hour hands moving so fast? Time had never run so fast. Conflot calls the Air Force commander every now and then. "Samokin, what have you heard?" "Nothing yet." "They're looking." "Where did the convoy go?" Finally, it came the long-awaited report from the pilots. But the one we least expected. Our planes didn't find the enemy. Bombs were dropped on alternate targets. There's no time to oohing and aahing. The commander orders to immediately search for the convoy and organize a second strike, now not only by aviation, but also destroyers and torpedo boats. Flew instructions to the Sea Rear Admiral Drozd, General Elisiv on Isel and General Samokin at his CP. At the second hour of the night flew out for reconnaissance another fighter plane. The commander and all of us did not leave the map, waiting for news from Elisiv. Why is the scout silent? After all, every minute is precious. At the door appeared the head of intelligence, Frumkin. I came up and quietly asked him, "How are things under Mariama?" "I see that the major is tired, covered in dust." "Not good yet. The fascists are pressing again." The communications officer on duty interrupts us. He has a telegraph ribbon in his hands. Conflot takes it and loudly reads General Elisiv's report. A convoy was found near Cape Masrags. 4 gunboats have gone out to attack. "How many miles from this cape to Riga?" asks the commander of the duty operator. 30. All mentally calculate, will the convoy have time to take refuge in Riga before it is attacked by our forces? And then time seemed to stumble and stretched slowly. Torpedo boats at sea. In the air bomber aviation. We're waiting for results, and still no results. Finally a call from the island of Isel. Squad torpedo boats under the command of Senior Lieutenant Vladimir Gumenenko. 2 hours. looking for the enemy. Still found it, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, despite the strong guarding of the convoy, made a daring attack from short distances. The boats received direct hits of shells, but safely returned to the base. Gumanenko reported the sinking of 2 German transports in the area of Cape Mesrags. After the departure of the boats began attacks on the convoy by our bomber aviation. Pilots observed direct hits of bombs and the death of transports and minesweepers. The strikes were carried out in groups of 5 to 9 airplanes. In total, more than 70 airplane sorties were made. The attacks did not stop until the convoy pulled into the western Divina. And it would have been even better for the torpedo boats if the aviation had struck just before their attack and thus reduced the convoy's course. This would have made the attack of the gunboats much easier, but alas, this could not be done. This was at 11:30, and our destroyers approached only at 13 hours. One destroyer slipped behind the entrance buoy, fired at the tail of the convoy. After that, Rear Admiral Drozd had nothing else to do but to return to Moonsund. On this day, the Nazis for the first time suffered at sea solid losses. 3 large transports, 25 different small ships were blown to the bottom. Our pilots shot down 8 enemy planes. And yet we were not satisfied with the operation. Torpedo attack would have been much more successful if the bombers hit the convoy not later and before the attack boats. And in general, we did not get the interaction of aviation with the ships. And how poorly worked our intelligence. As a result, some of the enemy ships reached their destination, and there was a full opportunity to send them to the bottom, every last one of them. We thought a lot about it then. Our pilots and torpedo men fought heroically, and it was not their fault that the case was not brought to the end. After a careful study of all the events of the day, we made a number of important decisions. And first of all, we tried to improve air reconnaissance of Libava, Vindava, and Urbensky Strait. We also revised the communications scheme and simplified it. It was obvious that reports about the enemy should be transmitted immediately to the commander, who, without waiting for special instructions, can immediately strike at the enemy. Under our previous scheme, reports went through many instances, and as a result, we, for example, learned about the enemy last, although the organization of strikes on convoys by different forces largely depended on the fleet headquarters. July 15th. Our mine torpedo aviation put mines directly on the approaches to the River Daugava. On these mines, a few days later, blew up a large Nazi tanker. Individual successes could not calm us down. Again and again at the fleet headquarters, we discussed the issues of combat interaction. It became obvious that without friendly work with General Alisiv and his staff, we cannot straighten out the situation. I had to meet with Alisiv and talk about everything. For this purpose, on July 19th, I went to the island of Ezel. By car we reached the port of Rohukila. Here we got under heavy bombardment and sat in some pit for about an hour. There was no other shelter. We could not understand what exactly the fascists were bombing. The already destroyed port, burnt-out wharf lines, broken apartment houses and blown-up oil storage tanks. Everywhere protruded charred, twisted iron. In the air carried the smell of burning. And the bombs continued to fall and plough the black, greasy ground. Again and again flew fragments of stone. The windows of our car were shattered. We were covered with garbage and mud. There were no military units or any military facilities on the territory of the port for a long time. Airplanes flew low and unpunished. Nobody shot at them. Then I realized, apparently, the plan of Hitler's command today was to bomb Rohukula, and the plan was blindly executed. All the planes left. The noise of engines was hushed. To the end of the burnt pier cautiously approached the guard boat Mo, with no less caution, and we made our way, jumping from one burnt log to another. Yet somehow we got to the boat. He tore off. We immediately flew out into the strait, away from this ominous place. We are carried along the quiet, smooth surface of the strait with 20 knots speed. We're approaching Cuivastu Marina. We are moored perfectly. I sincerely admire the skillful, precise work of sailors. As a former chief mate of the destroyer, I am quite satisfied with it. Thank you, bosun, you have a good mooring crew. I say goodbye to the tall petty officer of the first article. He smiles quite a lot. On the shore, I am met by the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel I. Oktinsky, a sturdily built, trim middle-aged man. We get in the car. I ask to drive as quietly as possible and scrutinize the area. On both sides of the highway is boiling work sailors, Red Army soldiers and local residents build pillboxes, bunkers, digging ditches, install hollows. Closer to the coastline are erected anti-landing obstacles and urgently completed battery. It is necessary to tell directly the headquarters of General Elisiv correctly located its forces. Exactly in these bays Hitlerites after tried to land their paratroops and were shamefully repulsed. During the whole day I did not see a single person who was not engaged in affairs related to the defense of the island. The natives had organized themselves into building parties. Sailors and soldiers were bringing in and dropping off materials and engineering parts. The clanking of iron, snorting of trucks, blows of shovels and axes, and sometimes deafening explosions the rocks were being destroyed with talcum. The commander of the coastal defense of the Baltic area, aka the commandant of all the islands, or as we called him in telegrams, KRBOBR, Major General A.B. Elisiv, an old Baltic sailor Bolshevik, together with Brigade Commissar G.F. Zaitsev invested a lot of energy to prepare a worthy response to the enemy. Their labours were not wasted, each island turned into a mighty fortress. The headquarters built itself a good command post of field type, with reliable protection from aviation bombs. General Elisiv met me near his dugout, where there was a small table and 2 benches. Many formation chiefs were not very clear about the staff work and its specifics. They explained all failures and difficulties by the lack of authority of their own or higher headquarters. I had already gotten used to it. No sooner had we settled down at the table than the general began to lay out his claims. I barely had time to write it down, realizing that until he said everything he had accumulated in his soul, none of our conversations about cooperation, battle management and intelligence will not succeed. Tell the military council that I have very few field troops, not enough anti-aircraft guns, not enough small-caliber artillery to repel the landing force. Recorded? He asked. I wrote it down, I answered. But now all the claims have been made. I closed the notebook and said, Comrade General, I also have a few questions for you, and immediately went on the offensive. Tell me, Alexander Borisovich, why did the airplane, being in readiness, flew for additional reconnaissance with a great delay, only after our secondary call from the headquarters? Why couldn't the torpedo boats leave immediately on the signal? Why now came my questions. We had come to the purpose of my arrival. A heated conversation began about the organization of the battle and its management in the urban strait, about the interaction of forces, about communication. Brigade Commissar Gavril Fyodorovich Zaitsev tried to soften the debate, to bring our points of view closer until we finally found a common language. In the end, it was decided the battle, striking the enemy convoy, will henceforth be commanded by one person, the commandant of the islands. All forces allocated to strike the enemy will promptly report only to him, General Elisiv. We immediately developed the basic schemes of air reconnaissance, direct communication with the ships stationed in Moonsunda, with submarines that were on patrol duty in urban. Gavril Fyodorovich Zaitsev was satisfied, and treating me to tea, noted, I see that the conference at the highest level has come to its favourable conclusion. Yes, he was right. A part of A. B. Elisiv's claims were solved the same day by contacting Tallinn by phone. The head of the rear Moskalenko sent a telegraph reply to all the needs of the islands in an hour. Most of the requests would be satisfied. Fleet headquarters was very concerned about shortcomings in the anti-landing defence of some deep bays. The general agreed with our remarks and immediately gave his staff all the necessary orders. Together we travelled around the most important bays of the island, visited the batteries and construction sites. On the move we solved a number of issues. In the evening I returned to Tallinn. I went straight to the operational map. I see that the front line has moved away from the city. G. E. Pilipovsky explains. Parts of the 8th Army strengthened and hold positions on the line Parnu-Tartu. During the day they drove the fascists 20 kilometers to the south. That's good. And how are things at sea? The chief of the operations department takes the magazine. As if it's not bad either. Torpedo boats captains second-rank Cherokov and Solomatin made a successful raid and again put mines on the fairways at the Finnish base Porvoo. I'm looking at the map. And what are these crosses? I ask the operational duty captain, Lieutenant Ovechkin. Usually rosy-cheeked, fresh as a cucumber, Ovechkin today something greyed, it seems, tired much, but still smiling. It is our boats on the return near Carey Island met 4 enemy patrol boats. 2 of them were drowned. Their graves are marked with crosses. Conflot ordered to pass this place by control trawling, Pilipovsky adds. The enemy may have placed mines there. I gave the necessary orders. While we were talking, the frantic crackling of anti-aircraft guns began. Ships and batteries on the shore were firing. White tulips dotted the blue sky. Fighter planes were screeching. After about 10 minutes everything quieted down, only to start again soon. At precisely defined times, morning and evening, an aerial scout appeared over Tallinn. Just that evening it was shot down by either pilots or anti-aircraft gunners. It's not important. What's important is that it was shot down. The pilot who parachuted down was captured and brought to our headquarters. Sailors from the guards had a lot of trouble to deliver this soldier. In one piece on the way there were many people who wanted to give him a poke. At the interrogation, the Hitlerite behaved pathetically and cowardly. He could not tell us anything useful. The results of the measures we had taken had an effect. All convoys in Urban were now detected in time, and crushing blows were dealt to them. Early in the morning of July 26th, the operational duty officer at headquarters reported to me. Again a convoy, but very strange, only 2 transports, and guard ships 18. So the transports are carrying some particularly valuable cargo. Fleet commander, listening to the report, thought about the map. The case was complicated by the fact that at this time in the Urbensky Strait, a group of our ships put mine barriers. But there is no bad without good. Taught by bitter experience, we this time, in addition to aerial reconnaissance mine-laying, covered also squadron destroyer. It could also be used to hit the enemy. Aerial reconnaissance sent a timely report. The convoy was detected in the sea on the approach to the Urbensky Strait. Conflot decided to send bombers and torpedo boats under cover of fighters to strike. Urgent dispatches flew to the destroyer at sea, to the aviation headquarters, and to the headquarters on the island of Ezel. At our control center calculations were made, it was clarified when, where and to whom to fly or go to sea. The destroyer was sent to Cape Kolka to intercept the convoy and to continuously monitor it. The same task was assigned to air reconnaissance. It was the continuous tracking of the detected enemy that we lacked in our past actions on convoys. We lost the enemy then. Now it did not happen. That's why the whole operation was different. At 13 hours 23 minutes, Lieutenant Captain S.A. Osipov with his detachment of torpedo boats under the cover of fighter aviation went to sea from Mintu Pier on the peninsula Svorby. And since the enemy was under our observation all the time, in an hour the boats easily detected the convoy in the area of Ovisi-Michaelbeck. Went 2 transports under the protection of 2 destroyers, 8 patrol ships and 8 torpedo boats. The convoy approached our mine barriers, as close as possible to the shore. Our aviation, which flew out to bombardment, also immediately detected the enemy, and even before the approach of torpedo boats, struck a powerful blow to the convoy. A fascist tanker caught fire. The ships of the convoy broke the formation, slowed down, and that was all that the gunboats needed. They rushed at the enemy. The Nazis, fighting off our planes, saw the boats when they were already rushing at them. Enemy ships opened heavy fire on the boats. Osipov, hiding behind the smoke of the burning tanker, and then, putting his smoke screens, was able to bring his boats to the enemy without losses. But at 14 hours and 48 minutes, the gunboats made a torpedo attack. The second transport was sunk. His death was observed by the crews of all our boats. Severely damaged were 2 destroyers and 1 patrol ship. In addition, our fighters shot down 2 German planes. This meant a complete defeat of the enemy convoy. Clear interaction of aviation and ships brought its fruits. Skillful tactical interaction showed the Baltic and August 1st. Air reconnaissance that day timely detected a detachment of fascist ships, 5 destroyers and minesweepers. Aviation quickly pointed our torpedo boats at the enemy. Captain Lieutenant S.A. Osipov and Senior Lieutenant V.P. Germanenko dashingly attacked the enemy from 9 to 11 cable meters. 2 minesweepers were sunk, and 1 destroyer was badly damaged and barely reached Riga on the tow of a minesweeper. The Battle of August 21st was equally successful. Having detected an enemy convoy in advance, an air scout sent a clear report about the enemy's location, its composition, course and speed. Having received such a signal, our destroyers Artem and Surovi under the command of Captain 2nd Rank S.D. Solukin immediately dropped anchor. In the area of Cape Masrags they attacked the Nazis, and, despite the fire of enemy coastal batteries and incessant raids of junkers, from 55 to 60 cable meters opened accurate fire, set fire to 2 patrol ships. A large self-propelled barge, moving as part of the convoy, itself was thrown out on the coastal rocks. A few days later it was smashed by a storm. During the departure of our ships on them were dropped more than 100 bombs. Continuously maneuvering, destroyers managed to dodge direct hits and safely returned to Moonsund. Thus, although the coast of the Gulf of Riga was in the hands of the enemy, and the bay was ours, the enemy was unable to use the sea route for systematic transportation and supply of his armies in the Baltic.